Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Asia Society Museums Live Museum Salon. Today's session, which focuses on publications, on museum publications, is the second in the series. And we started this museum salon for primarily two reasons. One, to allow the public and our members to get a sense of how the museum as an institution is responding to the current crisis, and also getting a sense of our sort of thinking behind what's going to happen after the actual medical pandemic sort of ends. And in sessions further down the road, we are going to also hear from our museum colleagues out in Asia and other parts of the US, so that we are able to give everybody also a sense of how the museum sector, across the globe, is responding. The other reason really is, in response to the request of many members of our friends of Asian art and our patrons who, have always asked for more access to behind the scenes information to how, the museum as an intellectual and cultural center actually does its work. And I realize that much of that seems, obscure and impenetrable. It's not accessible because, the public or generally only sees the end product, the exhibitions, the programs, the publications that sort of go out. So the Salon series really is to draw the curtain open on these kinds of things that all of you and members of the public generally only see in its end stages, but we don't generally don't see the process in getting there. Publications, of course, is one of the most important routes of knowledge dissemination, of the museum historically. It's one of the ways, other than exhibitions and direct programs such as public lectures and panels such as this. Publications really is the one of the routes, particularly for which the academic and the research of the museum is brought to the public, and usually they should be seen in tandem when it happens with the exhibition and programming of the museum. And of course, everybody is familiar with, after the millennium, there was a great kind of push also for the digital medium, for online ways of publishing as a kind of alternative. And, we are here in 2020, 2 decades after the millennium. And strangely enough, while, the digital medium goes on, the actual reality of print publication remains. It's not actually gone away. So I think we're in a kind of stage where the digital is an alternate stream, but it's not by any means a stream that is replacing the actual physical publication. So we're very happy to bring to you this second museum salon on this area of work of print and as well as digital publications, how it's done. And we have a great panel of people from the industry designers, as well as from Asia Society, our specialists who actually manage the entire mysterious publication process. So once again, before I end, I would like to, thank all our friends of Asian art, who really are the people that support the activities of the museum. You make a lot of our work possible. And in this age of the coronavirus and this age of uncertainty, we thank you for continuing to support us. We hope by renewing your membership and introducing your friends, who might find our content interesting, it's a very concrete way for you to help us do our work and ensure that we get over this crisis. So thank you all, and I'm going to hand over the session to our moderator for this morning, Ms. Kelly Ma, the Assistant Director for Global Arts and Collaborations at the Asia Society Museum. Have a good day.
Thank you, Boon Hui, for the introduction. Good morning from New York, and thank you all for joining us today to talk about museum publications. I'm honored to be sharing a stage with two of my Asia Society Museum colleagues, Maia Murphy, Publications Manager and Editor, and Can Tan, Executive Director of Global Artistic Programs and Deputy Director of the Museum, and two publications designers with whom we've collaborated over many years, Miko McGinty, Principal, and Rita Jules, Senior Designer of McGinty in Brooklyn. As arts organizations in many parts of the world are still closed to physical visitors, and most of our activities have been restricted to virtual interactions via Zoom calls and online programs, there's been a resurgence of the importance of printed publications, starting with the Los Angeles Times art critic Christopher Knight's effort of reorganizing his library of over 2,000 books, and the trend of having a serious bookshelf as your Zoom background, as well as the accessibility to the arts through reproduction and documentation, as mentioned in art review editor Martin Herbert's recent essay, Desire at a Distance. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly before the internet age, museum exhibition catalogs, artist monographs, and recordings of famous performances provide a way, sometimes the only way, to engage with art without physically traveling to the time or location where the artwork resided or took place. For many people, their first encounter with art, as Martin Herbert writes, was through reproduction and art books. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. There we go. I grew up in Taipei and have been to the National Palace Museum many, many times since childhood. However, to this day, I have yet to see in person two of the most important works in its collection, the Hanging Scroll that you're seeing on screen right now, Traveler Among Mountains and Streams, by Fan Kuan from the Song Dynasty, and some details, and Qing Dynasty court version up the river during the Qingming Shanghe Tu after the Song Dynasty painter Zhang Zeduan. You might wonder why I have not seen them in person, and it's because these masterpieces painted on silk are only exhibited for a short period of time, usually less than 2 months, every decade or so due to the preservation concerns over their delicate nature. They also never travel outside of Taiwan. But I learned about them in great detail through the National Palace Museum's illustrious publications for children, as well as in my art history classes. And up the river during the Qingming recently became a coronavirus meme, where all the figures interacting in the populous Song capital, Bianjing, were digitally separated to follow social distancing recommendation. Here, the Song Dynasty city folks respond to the call from Health and Welfare Minister by moving from 1 centimeter to 1 meter apart. So when I was in university, my art history classes used Asia Society Museum's exhibition catalogs as textbook. These tomes are not just pretty coffee table books, but also act as valuable sources of scholarship, where years' worth of research is distilled onto the pages for people to learn from and to study. But how do we condense thousands of words by different authors and images into coherent books, and how do we translate or add an experience walking through an exhibition into book form? So I'd like to ask Maia, Miko, and Rita to share with us what a typical production of an exhibition catalog might look like. Maia, would you like to start by first walking us through what we do on the museum side?
Sure, I'd be delighted. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Bunbi. Thank you for everyone who's joining us. I'm thrilled to be here. As was previously mentioned, my name is Maia. I'm the editor and manager of publications at Asia Society. And I am here to walk you through how to make an art book. So I can share, let's see. So here is a glimpse at the most recent catalog that we've put together. You can flip through it with us. And we were lucky enough to work with Rita and Miko on The Art of Impermanence, Japanese works from the John C. Weber collection and Mr. and Mrs. John D. Rockefeller III collection. This exhibition just closed at the museum, and this is the most recently produced catalog that we've done. So how did we get here? As Kelly mentioned, it's a huge collapse of information and work into a handheld object. And before I begin, I think it's important to remember that it's a really long process, and generally speaking, things don't always go exactly the way that you plan. There's this board game that I absolutely love. It actually hangs on the walls at Asia Society Museum. I have a detail which might be easier to see. So this was produced by a pair of designers in Seattle, and it's called So You Want to Publish an Art Book. And it's a board game you can actually play, and it kind of follows all of the unforeseen circumstances that might hit you when you're trying to put together a catalog. I won't dwell on these issues. I will instead walk you through the most straightforward process of making a museum publication, and how we get here to the final product, how you actually get to put the book on your bookshelf. So step one, it starts with the art. The curator develops an exhibition checklist, and that will provide the whole backbone of the catalog itself. Those will become typically the catalog entries, which usually fall on the back of the book, and they'll also inform the essays, which typically fall at the beginning of a museum publication, that help bring more nuance and context to whatever themes and ideas are being explained through the exhibition and these artworks. So that's step one. Step two, we begin to collaborate with everybody. Developing a publication is a very collaborative process. It's also very international. So we'll work with authors. They might develop some of the essays. They might work on some of the entries. We'll also find a co-publisher. That's someone who will help us structure the book and figure out a plan for disseminating it. We might hire an editor or an external reader, someone who really specializes in the themes that are being explored in this publication. And of course, we'll also find designers, people like Miko and Rita, who will help us bring this project to life. And this involves a huge amount of collaboration across wide geography. So just to give an example, we're working now on the catalog for our triennial program. Our designers are based in Seattle. Our artists come from all over the United States and Asia. Our co-publisher is based in Italy, and our editor is in Massachusetts. So it's truly a global effort. We'll then begin collecting photography, which is so important for a beautiful presentation of a catalog and for representing these amazing works of art in bound form. So this might require reaching out to institutions, artists, artist estates to get permission to use those images. We might also need to commission new photography, which would entail working with photographers locally or overseas. So we'll get all of those texts into a nice, edited, fine shape. We'll get all of our beautiful high-res images together, and then we pass that over to our designers, and I think I'll do the same thing and pass the conversation over to Miko and Rita at this point.
Thank you, Maia.
Mm-hmm.
So at the point where we enter into the process, it's usually an initial meeting where we talk about the book. We find out what the goals of the book are, what the themes of the book are. It's sort of a big moment where we can talk about what are the problems that we might run into in this particular project, and what are the best assets of the project, what are the best photographs we have, just sort of setting the scene, a big setting the scene moment. And so we have an example of the collection catalog we did with you guys. I think that was a really interesting first meeting. I think Rita has a PowerPoint photo of it, and then I can she and I can talk it through a little bit. there was an existing collection catalog of the more historic works in Asian Society's incredible collection. But it hadn't been updated for a number of years, and it didn't include any of the contemporary work that had been collected more recently. So that meeting was a super fun meeting because at that point we're presented with the historic collection, which we're very familiar with, and the contemporary collection, and we're saying, okay, these need to go in a book together, and the book needs to work for both groups equally well and equally beautifully. And we're going to reuse some of the material from the other one book and add to it with a whole new set of writing. So a moment like this is like the moment that the ideas start bubbling in your head about design. We start thinking about, like, are we going to have a traditional work on the cover or a contemporary work? Obviously, we ended with a contemporary work on the cover of the book. And Rita, do you want to talk about the inside a little bit, or and show us some of the pages?
Let's see. So the book is, it has a text adapted from the original author, Denise, with additions by Adriana, a curator at Asian Society. And we have the traditional collection with all new photography, which was shot against a white background. So the printer had to add this very pale green-gray tone throughout to unify them and give shape to the page. I think the sculptures really speak for themselves. They're so beautiful. There's also, it shows every single item in the collection. So porcelains. And it's divided geographically. Then we have an equal section of contemporary work. And they're treated parallel fashion. So each object is important as the last.
So for us, in the beginning, at the first meeting, that conceptual meeting, we don't know what the book's going to look like. We don't know what all the works are. By the time we get to the end of the process here, it's like, now these are all our friends. We know all the works really well. We are trying to honor exactly what the intent is from the curatorial side and from the museum side. And so it's like that process that happens in our office. And I think that that's sort of the big behind the scenes question. How do we get from that first meeting to this moment? I think that, the process is we go back to the studio, we have sample images, we have sample text, we make a map of what's going to go in the book, and we think a lot about how many pages does the book need to be, how many words are in the book, how many pictures. You compare in your mind from your experience what the intent is with the material you have and the amount of pages you have. And then we work together with Maia and with the museum and with the curatorial team. We show them sample designs and we explain like how the book fit will work and sort of what we're seeing in the sample material. And we usually have a meeting to talk about it. We make changes to the design. Often we'll talk about this in a little bit, but we give options because we know that, like, this is the perfect example. Like, this book could look traditional or it could look contemporary. And it brings different meaning to the collection to present it in different ways. In this book, ultimately, the decision was made that it needed to look like this book was published today and it contains the whole collection. So that's how we got to this cover and this point. After we do the sample designs, then we go back, we take the edited text from Maia. At that point, she will have gotten all the images together, the text will be ready, and we lay the book out for the first time. Sometimes we find new things at that moment, but typically I think, especially with this team, like, we will have anticipated everything. There are definitely projects where new things crop up, but this team is amazing, so we always know we have what we have in hand. And then from the first layout, we show it, everyone reads it, people put their comments together. There are layout comments, pictures that ended up on different pages that maybe someone wants together, text corrections. We go through many rounds. This is the part that takes a long time. Do you want to talk about color correction at all, or Maia?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you. So one of my favorite parts of the process is color proofing. So once we'll get some test proofs of the book delivered to us. These are physical pages on the actual paper using the actual printer. And so we can really look at those closely and make sure that what we're seeing on the page is true to the object in real life that we're trying to represent. You know, it's difficult to condense a 2-year process into a 5-minute conversation, but I wanted to highlight this point, especially just because it really is a moment when so many people are working together on the same thing. And so I did have a picture of that. Let's see. I hope you all can see that. This is an image of color proofing the catalog I shared at the beginning, The Art of Impermanence. So these are pages containing images that were in that catalog. They're shipped to us in this giant bundle. It's so exciting when they arrive, and we unroll them on a table. We get the curator, we get the designers, and we look at them really meticulously, and ideally, you know, we'll hold the page up to the object in the room and see what's working. I chose this page because it had different types of materials in it, especially this gorgeous campaign coat, which is in the Weber collection, that had this beautiful metallic threading that's so subtle, and this was the first round of color proofs, and that metallic nature just wasn't really popping yet. So we highlighted that for our co-publisher on this project, Officina Libreria in Italy, who are fantastic partners. They fixed it right away, and so in the next round of proofs, we got it back, and that gold metal was really popping. You really got a sense of the materiality of the object, even on a 2D page. So after that, it's just a matter of, you know, making those tweaks and color corrections. And then there's this very exciting moment when you can finalize the materials and go to print. And that's usually a day to celebrate in the office because it's done. And then, you know, it's done for us at least. It then goes to the printer. I've received images of just stacks and stacks and stacks of paper in Italian print shops, and then those are obviously bound and shipped to us. We often get some books by ship, some by airplane. It just depends on our timing, and then we get them in hand. Okay, that's how you make a book.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. So I also have some questions that's directed to all of the panelists, and I'll just call on people as we go around. I'll ask Miko to respond first, and maybe Rita together to the following question. And some of us have already talked a little bit about it too. What's your favorite part of developing an art book?
So I think I picked out 2 ideas for this. One is the photography, looking at the photography of the artworks the first time is a super exciting moment. In the book that we just showed, the collection catalog, you guys did all new photography. It was all unified. That was probably one of the most thrilling moments, because having worked with many of the objects in the collection before, but not having seen them in the new photography until that moment, it was this big excitement. This is what this book is going to look like. So that's one of my favorite parts, just in terms of moment. In terms of process, I really love working on the covers of the books. And so let's see, I think we have, this cover that we're going to show is an amazing example of great photography and a really fun cover moment. So this is the Kamakura cover. I love this photograph. I think that the photographer brought so much life into the face and into the eyes. The eyes are, as we know, are this quite extraordinary, unusual sculptural element in and of themselves. I think that we knew from the very beginning that this would make an incredibly powerful cover, that when you put it out in the bookstore, you have it in a library, it would jump forward to you, which is the big exciting thing you're looking for when you're doing the cover. You want a cover that captures what the material is inside the book, but then also communicates outward in the world with other covers around it. And so, and then I thought that Rita made a really beautiful, adding this little bit of orange to the bottom of the type to sort of soften it and to like give it a little bit of like a color tie to the wood parts of the object that are visible, and also to like give it a little subtle touch. So so covers are one of my favorite parts. I love doing it with living artists who have made the work. It's really an honor to work with them. And on the historic projects, like with many artists in the show, sometimes the cover is like incredibly complex to get to. Does one work on the cover? How do we manage that? I think I love all of that part of design. Rita, I think you also had a...
Yeah, I'd like to talk about typography, which is really my absolute favorite part of designing, and that is choosing the typeface and arranging it on the pages. I was going to show The Art of Impermanence, which was the most recent book that we did, which Maia talked about. We had many design options in the beginning, and together we narrowed it down to this image of the tattered fan, which is from that campaign coat that Maia showed. And we had 2 type options as the last runners-up. And this one is Empirica headline, which is so delicate and spiky. It goes really well with the gold fan. Can you see?
No.
Not sharing. Oh. Perfect.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay, so you can see the fan and how we were thinking we would gold stamp this type in gold foil and that it would really react with the image. It's designed by Tobias Fair-Jones. And then the one that you saw in Maia's presentation, this one is called Santa Croce. It's a contemporary display face, which is based on inscriptional lettering inside the Santa Croce Basilica in Florence that's been worn down over time. So it's partial erasure, makes it a little bit challenging to read, but absolutely perfectly encapsulating the poetic title, The Art of Impermanence. And I was really excited when everyone agreed, chose it, and it's now on the real book.
Great. Maybe Ken can talk a little bit, since you have also been working in a graphic design capacity and also managed like publications before you arrived at Asia Society.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kelly. Actually, I'd like to jump back to an earlier question you had about the process, because I think one thing was missed is the dreaded budget. I mean, we usually have to start thinking in a ballpark sort of range, and I unfortunately now my job is to look at a lot of the budgets, and to Maia's point, it's a very concerted effort by many different people, which means you have to also pay a lot of different people. So it's all to just try to like keep the integrity of the design and the concept and the ideas all intact while not, going over budget. That's it. It always goes over budget. So it's also, I guess, some of the challenges that in my previous experiences with design is to always look at how can you conceptualize, and I think my favorite part would be the conceptualizing phase, a design, a format, an object, because the book is an actual object that you can hold in your hands, while keeping it within, so to speak, like a budget that you have in mind, because budget not permitting, you can go crazy with anything, right? And you could have gold foil on top of lenticular prints, on top of like gate folds and all that, and you can go on and on. So the interesting thing is in working with an actual constraint and then being as creative as possible within that constraint, because end of the day, it's the designer yourself trying to make sense of an exhibition that is there, even though it's only for a set time. You are creating a manifestation of this exhibition into an object that's going to live way past that exhibition's due dates. So how do you condense all that within budget with great design, not for yourself, but for an audience that can actually use it to read and get information from it for years and years and years and generations to come. So that in my sort of, for my interest, I like that sort of thinking. I like that sort of conceptualizing. So in concepts, in first coming up with a design, I usually look at, yes, what the curator is saying, what the exhibition is about, or if it's an artist monograph, what the artist is trying to say, and with the works or a certain body of works, and then try to like distill that essence into a concept of the book that could make the book itself an art piece. So I try to get a little funky with these sort of concepts, and I'm just going to show like a quick example of something I've done in the past, not for Asia Society, but my own sort of like freelance work before I joined Asia Society. So let me just bring this up. So this is an all black book, black cover, black text, and the text, the typography is a very simple Trajan font, and it just sits there like a tombstone. It's black on black. The only way you can read the text is sort of this little coated gloss coat that, when you move the book around in light, you could pick up the text from it. So what the artist was trying to do with her works in this particular show is referencing Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's famous Frankenstein novel, where it's all about polarities. It's about black, white, light, dark, good, evil, man, not man. So that's sort of like polarities in her work. And an interesting fact is the idea during Frankenstein, it was the age of enlightenment. So that rationality, books, thinking, Descartes, that sort of thing, all had to do with a sort of illumination of a man, of humanity, a sort of like enlightening of ideas, of intelligence, of rational thinking. So all that played with the works in the show. So when I thought about that, I wanted to bring that essence of illumination, light in darkness, darkness in light, into one book. Now, the book is all black, but the interesting thing and the challenging thing is there is an element of glow in the dark. I printed glow in the dark ink on the text and all on the sides of the books, and actually on every other page in the book, there's also glow in the dark text. So for example, if you were to view the book at night, it actually glows up. The sides of the book in the pages, they all glow, suggesting that the knowledge within the pages sort of illuminates and helps illuminate someone, it edifies someone's knowledge. And it's a simple sort of straightforward layout in the book itself, but I have pages where it's simply just black, but I encourage the artist to actually go into every other page like that, to start to hand draw sketches as if it's her own sort of like mental purging of ideas that I then translated into glow in the dark ink that can only be seen in the dark. So every other page had that. Needless to say, this project just quickly went out of budget very, very fast. But it was, again, it's like back to the point where I felt that was really, really crucial to making or breaking design and integrity of the idea for the book, and also to supplement the exhibition. And yeah, what the hell, just go with it.
Sorry. So thank you, Ken. So I also want to know, so yeah, thank you for also commenting on what's like the more challenging side of things. And I was, Maia, would you like to talk about what might be the more challenging part on your side? And then Miko and Rita can comment on theirs.
Sure. So part of the challenging part of making a project is, you know, I actually think a lot to what Ken just spoke about is conceptualizing a book as an object that is a rigorous and creative presentation of everybody's hard work. The curators, the authors, the researchers, the printers. You know, you want to make something that is a long-lasting testament to not only the exhibition itself, but in some cases, the process of making the book itself. So I brought with me an example of one book that I worked on a few years ago, so not at Asia Society. Can you see that?
Yeah.
No, let me try again. But this was a book undertaken at the Artists Institute, which is, now can you see it? Thank you. So the Artists Institute is a nonprofit based in New York City. It's a project of Hunter College, and I was a research fellow there when I was a graduate student at Hunter. So the Artists Institute is basically a storefront public space that invites an artist to come in and make new work over about 6 months. The research fellows that are in session there at the same time are doing sort of parallel explorations. These might be programming projects, they might be publishing projects, etc. And for my session, we worked with this wonderful artist named Lucy McKenzie. She's a contemporary Scottish artist. She's a painter, she does some installation, and she also has a publication factor to her own practice. And so really the head curators of the Artists Institute were driving this publication, and my involvement was as more of an author in this instance. But the reason this project came to mind as emblematic of something that rose to a challenge was for a few reasons. The first was that this publication was conceived of as a serialized project. So you can see here there's different installments which were released slowly over the 6 months that Lucy McKenzie was in session with us at the Artists Institute. This did a couple things. Primarily, it encouraged people to come back and revisit the space over and over again. And Lucy's project is really one that rewarded multiple viewings. I think a lot of contemporary artists, especially those who are working in more challenging medium, reward a slow viewing, a repeated visit. They really want to build a relationship with an audience. And so by leaking these publications out slowly over time, we incentivized audiences to come back and pick up the new thing. This isn't a new strategy. Writers have been serializing their publications for hundreds of years. Ulysses was originally a serialized novel, so was Middlemarch, Crime and Punishment. So we didn't invent this, but it worked well for our purposes. It was also, to Ken's point, fairly affordably made. I thankfully didn't have to do anything in terms of the budget for this. But, these are closer to a sort of zine or self-publishing aspect of making an artist book. They were just done locally in New York with a sort of designer. The materials are nice, they're not cheap, but we didn't, break the bank making this project. But crucially, each one, and I hope you can see this at the bottom, included a piece of printed matter or ephemera. So in some cases it was a picture or a drawing by Lucy McKenzie. One of them is a laser cut, more abstract design. So those are just stapled to the front, and they're really beautiful. I mean, it's nice to have as a set, and I think it kind of triggers this collector mentality that a lot of book lovers have, where they want to collect things and get all of them. And I think importantly, it was a way of publishing that allowed us to be nimble and responsive, where a lot of museum publications take a couple years to produce. These were produced in about a month. So Lucy could do something in the space, the students could see it, react, produce something, and then it could be hot off the presses in the next week. It was a really lovely way to just sort of keep creative juices flowing. And I thought it was a nice representation of the work being done by the Artists Institute and Lucy herself.
Thanks. Rita and Miko, would you like to talk about the challenges?
So for this one, we chose a project called Hanging Fire, contemporary art from Pakistan that we did with Asia Society. We're going to show you the book itself. So the challenge with this book is that we had like a huge variety of quality of images. One big challenge that affects us every day is that in the early days of digital photography, the quality wasn't that great. So for an installation that can't be recreated, or in this case, there were artworks that weren't going to be assembled and installed again until the exhibition at Asia Society, there was no way to do new photography. We needed to work with what we had. In a dream world, we would have sent a photographer out to all of the contemporary artist studios, set up the work again, and take a new photograph and have like glorious new photography. But it absolutely wasn't possible with this book for budget reasons, as we've discussed, practical reasons, even the timing. So we knew we had to make a beautiful book that would capture the spirit of the show and really celebrate the contemporary artists and the artwork. But we needed to work with images that were from like super professional to very early digital photography, often done by the artists themselves. So our solution was, we decided to print the book on uncoated paper, which is more forgiving to the images, to the resolution. It kind of soaks in the ink a little. It kind of smooths things out. So that was one of our big important decisions in terms of like thinking about production and solving a problem at the same time. And then, you know, we worked on the cover and on the interior. I think Rita's going to talk about that.
Yeah, so I have the book here. Might stand up to show this better. This is the cover. We have a half jacket and this beautiful purple cloth, and we silkscreen the title on it. We used a lot of gradients to help create interest when we didn't have images big enough to fill pages like we usually might. These gradients are very hard to print evenly, especially on uncoated paper, but our printer did an amazing job. Sometimes we had things that we could feature.
Yeah, that was beautiful photography for those.
Yeah. You know, video shots, for instance, don't suffer that much from being on uncoated paper. They are what they are in terms of resolution and sharpness. And works originally on paper, of course, are beautiful on uncoated sheets. And then, yeah, we have really strong display typography to help anchor each section, since the images were of differing sizes on the left.
So the goal is that by the end of the project, you have no idea that at the beginning, you know, we had this moment where we were really concerned that through design and through a great relationship with the printer and through working with you guys, like we're able to get to a book that everyone is super proud of. And the show was amazing. So I was really proud that we pulled on that together.
It looks really great, thank you. And also building on what Ken was talking about in terms of like interesting and extraordinary material that to work with, like the invisible / glow in the dark ink. I was wondering if everyone wanted to talk a little bit about what that might have been for you, whether it's like content or, you know, a physical material. Rita and Miko?
I can talk about Iran Modern if you like.
Great.
So we have this book by Farmayan. Miko, is that?
Monir.
Yeah.
Monir Sharudi Farmayan.
Thank you.
So the artwork itself is a mirror, and we were trying to figure out how best to present it on the cover. We worked with a material called cold foil, which you can see here a little bit how it works. Cold foil, first the printer prints a level of glue down on the paper, and then they put down the metallic, silver in this case, and it adheres only to the glue. And then on top of that, they print the 4 process colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And then we also have another color, a spot neon orange. they can control which part is metallic and which part just has the white paper. You can see the white paper showing through here. And that's so that we can get special colors to be very bright. As you can tell, it reflects everything around it. So if you print directly on the metallic part, the color is dimmer. And
it's sheer, kind of.
Yeah, it's sheer. And if there's shadow in front of it, it's very dark. But you can still have brightness by using this special technique. And it's just the perfect marriage of technical production and the original artwork, I think. It turned out really beautifully.
Yeah. I believe it's one of our best-selling catalogs because we are out of stock. So if anyone has already gotten a copy at home, this is now priceless. So Maia, do you have any interesting or extraordinary materials you'd like to share?
Of course. So the project that came to mind off the bat was I worked a lifetime ago at Creative Time. Creative Time is a New York-based nonprofit. It was founded in 1974. I was there in 2007. And they chose this year to sort of mark their own history and take a moment to really celebrate what they had done. So they put out this publication marking their first 33 years of public art in New York City. For those of you who aren't familiar with Creative Time projects, I think their most well-known project is, you can see it in the bottom image there, Tribute in Light, which was developed as a memorial to those who lost their lives in 9/11. And this project is very emblematic of what Creative Time does. They do art in public spaces. It's usually can't be held in a gallery. It's really out of the box, thinking. The image that you see above is by an artist named Vic Muniz. He drew clouds in the sky using an airplane. So one of my tasks was to go through 33 years of archives at Creative Time, which was housed in a filing cabinet. And it's sort of emblematic of a lot of issues of converting an archive into a publication. The first is that I think especially a lot of younger nonprofits aren't able to think about archiving. They might not have the budget, they might not have the staff, they might not think that they're going to be around for 30 plus years. So those earliest files could be, most of them were very thin. They might be handwritten notes by an artist, they might be licenses from the city to do a project, they might be like soil samples. It was just all over the place with unusual elements. There's also the issue when you're dealing with decades of time, and listen, 33 years is not that much time, right? Like some of the publications that Asia Society covers is hundreds and hundreds of years, so this is just 33. But even within that time, when you go back to the earlier files, you're dealing with floppy disks, you're dealing with, ancient forms of technology. And so there's this real issue of preserving digital files too. I mean, we've lived with digital files for a long time, and a lot of those now are semi-inaccessible to us just because technology has advanced so quickly. But these were exciting problems to tackle, especially as a younger person, and putting together this book and getting to go through this treasure of an archive was such a crash course in learning about New York arts, especially socially engaged arts. And so it's always stuck out as a very memorable project to me.
Great, thank you, Maia. I'm gonna combine my last two questions to everybody. So the first one is, the pandemic has definitely hit every industry, especially now. Everyone is staying at home, and physical bookstores are closed, museums are closed, and museum stores are closed. So if for Miko, Rita, and Maia, if you can tell us what you've observed the last 2 months, how it has some of the changes in the world of art publications, and also the age of COVID-19. And this ties into one of the questions that we have received from the audience in New York. So like the COVID-19 has required many of us to spend more time in the digital realm than we have previously, including engaging with art through a lens, be it of virtual museum tours or online viewing rooms at art fairs. What has the reaction to printed media versus digital that you have encountered in previous years and in the last couple of months that you find more interesting, especially now? The only way we can interact with art is through reproduction. So I'd like to start with Miko and Rita. If you can start talking about the changes you've seen, and then like what do you think about moving into digital or looking at things only through a publication?
I think, so I've been designing art books for 25 years, and in this 25 years, we've seen a lot of change. It's interesting, the question sort of touches on this. Like, you know, when I started designing books, there were no way to see the artwork except in person or in a book. There was no internet. As the internet's come into play, the books have changed their roles because they're not the only way to see the artwork. You can see the artwork online. So the book has had to sort of become an object, more of an object. But it still also has this really important role of bringing the artworks together, bringing the criticism together, sort of being an object into itself. In this period, the thing that we're seeing, and I'm talking to my distributors and talking to the publishers that we work with, all the presses, having all the museum bookstores closed right now is really significant for art books. So many art books are seen and purchased and engaged with in a museum bookstore, and they're all closed right now. So we know there's this buildup of books from this season that haven't been seen or purchased, and those are going to get combined with whatever's going to be published this fall. And the question is, I think there will be many, many great books that have been worked on for 2 years that are going to come out, but will people be able to see them? And the answer to that, I think, is that like our Basquiat and the Writing the Future, Basquiat and the Hip Hop Generation, the book that Rita and I did for the MFA Boston, they've been featuring the book on Instagram. It's been getting some traction, primarily because Liz, the curator, is really, she's sent the book out, people are posting it. She's been able to really sort of create energy around this book that she's been working on for 2 years. And it's like fascinating. I mean, the show did not open, and it was an amazing show, and definitely, at least right now, we have the book to sort of push out into the world. But I do hope that people are looking for the books that are going to come out this year, because they are records of shows that may not happen. So. Rita?
Well, I think the question about whether a digital versus print is, from our point of view, both are containers that can hold all the curatorial scholarship and the imagery moving forward. I wanted to share our book Densitil, which is a record of a Buddhist monastery that was built in the 12th century, but destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. So this really shows something that was around at a moment. Here it is, in this very remote area. The man on the right went on an expedition in the late 40s and was accompanied by a photographer, and that's how we have some of these photographs that show how overwhelming a sensual experience this would have been in person. So scholars have been able to reconstruct diagrams to explain based on the photography and written records. And Asia Society showed the original objects, but in the book we were also able to pair them with the photos of them in situ so you would understand them in their original context. I feel like the monastery doesn't exist anymore, but this book still brings it together in our imagination and gives so much information and vitality. And that, you can do that just as I did by sharing this PDF, or you can do that in the physical form of the book, which lasts on our bookshelves and in libraries, when we can no longer read a PDF. But both ways contain the same valuable information.
Yeah, we were really struck by the parallel, so here's something that doesn't exist anymore, but we have a record of it through photography. How are we going to archive the digital assets, all the things that we've created, all the PDFs and files and photos and digital versions of the books. How can we disseminate them? How can we send them to students who can't get to the art books today and desperately need them to write their papers? I think these are the big questions moving forward about digital and publishing.
Just to add to that, I think you are right, and we shouldn't be looking at digital and print as replacing each other, because they both serve different functions and they should be looked at differently, because obviously each has its own strengths. We don't have to go into all the strengths today, but one of the most obvious for digital is its reach, its speed, and also its interactivity. So if you think of digital, the exploration of digital, you can actually do virtual sort of tours and all that, which obviously a print cannot. But the print has so much more value in itself as a printed object. The tactility, the sort of ability to keep it on your bookshelf and go back to it day after day, year after year. And also, again, like I said, you could pass it down to the next generation, and that's as a extra somatic sort of like material. That's how civilization sort of like grows, isn't it? So I think it's not so much about like seeing what can replace each other, even though it's a pandemic and we're all in lockdown. I think the print must go on, and we'll always have books.
Yeah, I hope so. I do think that the beauty of books has such an ancient technology that somehow has been able to withstand time. And I guess, when you have an internet outage, physical books are a lot more reliable. And Maia, do you have any comments, like your observations, and what are your aspirations in terms of like print publications?
Sure, thank you. I agree resoundingly with what Rita, Ken, and Miko have all said. It was just nodding along yes to all those observations. I think I might return to the first part of your question, just changes in the last 2 months, since we haven't talked about that quite as much. Obviously, there's been a huge impact on the workforce caused by the pandemic. Here in New York, The Strand is a beloved bookstore that recently laid off 188 people. Powell is a sort of equally beloved bookstore on the West Coast that laid off 360 people. Every aspect of that production chain that we've talked about today, from artists to curators to printers to people that work in distributions and warehouses to designers, they're all impacted either through labor issues. They might be sheltering in place, as so many of us around the world are. That's obviously impacted our ability to produce catalogs at this time. Miko mentioned there's been delays. Book Expo is an annual huge industry event that takes place here in New York. It was delayed this year because it typically takes place at the Javits Center, which during the time when it would have been Book Expo is instead serving as a temporary field hospital. So, the impact of coronavirus to publishing is just incredible. I did want to highlight a success story that's come out of this, just to sort of have some positivity. In February, a new online bookstore called bookshop.org, I'm going to plug them, launched. And bookshop.org partners with independent bookstores and to be an online marketplace for selling books. And then they split the profits with those independent bookstores. They launched in February. They made about $28,000 a week. By March, they were making $380,000 a week. And they attribute this to the incredible interest in reading. Obviously, we're at home. We might want some comfort. People are turning to reading. There's also industry events that weren't outright canceled. The LA Art Book Fair is a very beloved event that happens. It's sponsored by Printed Matter. They were supposed to meet in April, and they just put that whole thing online, including performances, workshops. They still had book releases. The archive is all on their website. I encourage you to look through it. It's very invigorating. And then I think we've all kind of touched on it a little bit. but there's just been this sort of interest in like people's bookshelves as a background. So I pulled a few screenshots just from the New York Times. This is just from the New York Times, but this is everywhere. People are so interested in what other people are reading, and there's such a fascination about that this really is an incredible time for publications and sharing those and thinking about what we're reading, and it's been exciting to see that. It's been a bright moment.
Great. We have one last question from our audience on YouTube. If catalogs are enhanced as collector's objects, how does it impact scholarship? As first and foremost, the prior should be the written material. I guess that could be a question for Maia, Miko, and Rita. I guess, Maia, do you want to talk about it from your end, and then Miko and Rita can comment on the design side?
Sure. Thank you so much. So, I started this talk by saying art is the backbone of a catalog. Equally important is the scholarship. I really couldn't underestimate the amount of work that's put into this by our authors and researchers. And it really does become a record, and books open up so many possibilities for combining image with written word. You can bring objects that are far apart in real life on facing pages and do a comparison. You can look at incredible details in works and write about those. So, I'm not sure if the priority is just the written word as much as, at least from my point of view, and I'm sure, ask 100 people, get 100 answers. But I really enjoy thinking about the possibilities of combining words with image to advance scholarship or open up new possibilities for thinking and learning about art.
Yeah, we really deeply believe in our curators and scholars and the collaborators we've had on all of the Asia Society projects. Like, in so many ways, we're here to help make the argument stronger, to make it clearer, to make it beautiful, to communicate the concept of the show, the concept of the artwork. Like, we're very invested in the material, in the artist, and in the scholarship. I don't think that, like, the things that you add to the book that are like the glow-in-the-dark ink is like this incredible addition that helps amplify the idea. Or the metallic cover is like a way of taking Monier's work and then like making it present in a way it hasn't been able to be before on a non-reflective material. So I think it's like adding to, it's not taking away. It's not taking away certainly from the commitment to scholarship, which you guys like exemplify really. So I think there probably are places where maybe that balance isn't at the same level, but that's really based on the institution and the institution's commitment. And that's one of the great honors of my career, is working with institutions who are so invested in the scholars and in the artists and in the artworks themselves.
And just to add to that, I think the book speaks for itself. It's, the content, the book, everything, the package. After a while, if you find that you don't return to it, it goes to show that, it's maybe not really well done. Some aspect of it's not really well thought of or thought out in the first place. So it's really a testament to all the high level sort of like work that is put into making this one object, from the essays to the design to the publishing and the printing and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Rita, do you have anything else to add?
No, here.
Great. So unfortunately, we only have an hour, and I will have loved to talk more about books since, we are all book lovers. It's been an absolute pleasure for us to share this conversation with you, especially our Global Council of Asian Arts and Culture and Friends of Asian Arts and Asia Society members. I'd also like to thank my panelists, Ken, Maia, Miko, and Rita, for being here today to talk about museum publications. Since we're all book lovers, I would also like to remind you that our colleague, Sarah McCaffrey, Manager of Interdisciplinary Arts, has organized a virtual book club with the author Kathy Park Hone next Wednesday, May 27th at 6:30 p.m. New York time. And don't forget that we also have the last of the Art of Impermanence exhibition lectures next Thursday, May 28th at 6:30 p.m. New York time with Harvard College Professor of Japanese History and Culture, Melissa McCormick. As you've probably noticed, Asia Society is proud to be offering our quality content free of charge right now. If you enjoyed today's program, we ask that you consider giving a gift of any size to support our work. If you're watching on YouTube, you can donate by checking out the link in the video description below. If you're not in a position to give right now, that's totally fine. Again, we're very pleased to be offering our content free of charge, especially in these times. I'd like to close our conversation today by reading a passage from Susan Sontag's letter to Jorge Luis Borges in 1996, a decade after Borges' death, that I recently saw in the documentary The Booksellers by D.W. Young about the New York rare books world, which also talked about Strand Bookstore that Maia mentioned. If books disappear, history will disappear, and human beings will also disappear. Books are not only the arbitrary sum of our dreams and our memory, they also give us the model of self-transcendence. They are a way of being fully human. So thank you very much again, and we can't wait to see you when we reopen the museum. And in the interim, please stay healthy and stay safe. Have a nice Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.